I'm going to kick off with not the obvious. I'm going to talk to you about trade here and the opportunities presenting themselves for a country like Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, we've had an extraordinary growth story in China and in Hong Kong for the last 4 or 5 years. In fact, over the last 4 years, we've seen our trade with China double. It's now, this year, probably about 16 billion euros worth of trade, which for a small country like Ireland of 4.5 million people is a big deal. And so I'm here to try and reinforce that. There are a lot of Irish companies investing here right now, and we're also seeing more Chinese companies investing in Ireland as a gateway into the European Union. So it's a very positive economic partnership that's developing between this huge market and Ireland as a relatively small country, but I think a very strategic partner as an entry point into the EU.
With many tax advantages as well, and with the Britain leaving the European Union, that throws up a lot of opportunities for you, does it not, as a gateway city such as Dublin or perhaps some of the others like Cork and Shannon?
Yeah, I mean, Ireland is a very competitive tax package, undoubtedly, but also Ireland is soon going to be the only English-speaking country in the European Union, and I think that is going to have big advantages in terms of when people are looking from other parts of the world at the appropriate gateway into the EU, and they look at a platform for international trade, and they see Ireland, I think, as a very attractive destination.
Talk to me about Brexit, and one of the things which wasn't really discussed as people voted, in the end, of course, to leave, but the Northern Irish border. How intractable is it? Is it intractable? And where are you with it?
Well, it's certainly proving a difficult issue to solve, I think, for the British negotiating team right now. I mean, we have said that we want the closest possible relationship with Britain in the future. But as people know, the island of Ireland is 2 jurisdictions. It's Ireland and it's Northern Ireland. At the moment, after 20 years of a successful peace process, that border is invisible. So people, trade, livestock, services, they move seamlessly on the island of Ireland as an all-island economy, and it's very successful. And that has been a real stabiliser in terms of peace and a peace process as well. So this is about a lot more than trade. It's about the normalisation of life on the island of Ireland, where there aren't barriers to the movement of people and goods, as there were in the past, when there was a physical border infrastructure on the island of Ireland. So we're very protective to make sure that that doesn't return. The British government, I think, is also committed to ensuring that there isn't border infrastructure. And so in December, we had what's called a default agreement, that in the absence of political agreement on a better alternative, well, then we would ensure that the border on the island of Ireland would remain invisible, by the UK maintaining full alignment with the rules of the single market.
That's the point, though, isn't it?
That is a very difficult political thing, though, I accept, for the British government to deliver. And that is why we want to work with them, and we want to work with the EU to try and find a political solution here between the EU and the UK that can solve the Irish border issue. And also ensure that we have as seamless a trading relationship in the future as possible. But of course, the British government, I think, makes that very difficult by their stated position of wanting to leave both the customs union and the single market.
Absolutely, because you are ultimately, Minister, representing a country which has the only land border with the rest of the European Union, and that's the difficulty, is it not? So by maintaining a customs union with Ireland, you have to keep a customs union with the rest of the European Union.
Well, look, I mean, you know, if goods move from one customs union into another, when they move from one jurisdiction on the island of Ireland into another, then there has to be some border checks. So we have to prevent that from happening. And we are happy to talk to the British government about ways in which they think they can achieve that. But in the absence of that agreement, we're very clear on the default, and the EU is very clear on the commitment that was given by the British government in December, which is in the absence of a political agreement on an option A or an option B, that the default position is that Northern Ireland would essentially ensure that there isn't a border with the Republic of Ireland by maintaining the alignment with the rules of the customs union and single market. Now, that of course creates problems for the United Kingdom's single market between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. And so we want a more comprehensive solution that can solve all of these problems. But at the moment, it's very difficult to see how that can work unless the British government changes its approach towards a future relationship with both the single market and customs union, which so far they haven't been willing to do.
Deputy Prime Minister, how are negotiations otherwise going? And is there any likelihood that we could see some kind of semblance of a finalisation of a transition deal by the March summit?
Well, I think that both sides are very anxious, as indeed Ireland are, to try and get a clarity around transition. And for your listeners, what that means is that when Britain leaves the European Union in just over 12 months' time, both negotiating teams on the EU and the UK side have said that there will be a transition arrangement for about 2 years that can give businesses and companies and traders the time that they need to adapt to a new reality. And that transition period will end towards the end of 2020. If it needs to be extended, well, then it can probably be extended for a short period after that, if that's what's necessary. But I think that there's a lot of pressure coming from businesses in the UK on the British government to try to get clarity in relation to that transition arrangement. And what's likely to happen there is that the rules that are currently in place within the European Union will apply in Britain for that period of time, so that people and businesses aren't going to be asked to change twice, once for a transition arrangement and then once for a more permanent future relationship. And so that is the first thing that I hope the negotiating teams will be able to get agreement on in the coming weeks and months, so that then we can move on to what's called a withdrawal treaty, which we have a draft of now from the EU side, but more importantly, we can start to negotiate what the future relationship can look like. And hopefully from an Irish perspective, and indeed from an EU perspective, we want that future relationship to be as close as possible to the status quo, so that we can maintain the very strong trading relationship that we have with the United Kingdom, but that the EU has with the United Kingdom as well. I think that makes sense. But let's wait and see how these negotiations develop, because they are complex.
Yeah, I'm just looking at, the findings of this latest KPMG report saying that businesses are favouring certainty over a full Brexit deal, which in itself seems to be contradictory. But, to that end, how much of the contended issues can actually be left beyond that deadline that you can kind of sort it out afterwards, including the border?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think in truth, there is no way we're going to have a detailed, free trade agreement negotiated before Britain leaves the European Union. I think anyone who's involved in these negotiations understands that. It takes years to put a free trade agreement together, sector by sector. And there are a lot of complicated areas, from aviation to food to financial services, that will need sector by sector negotiation here. And that is because Britain is choosing to leave both the customs union and the single market, which makes it very complicated. And so I think what's likely here is that hopefully by October, November time, we will have effectively a framework agreement in place, which will set the parameters within which we can agree a free trade agreement in the future. And the reason why there's a need for that type of agreement by October is that the European Parliament will need probably 4 or 5 months to ratify any agreement. And of course, the British government has given a commitment to bring a heads of agreement, if you like, to their Parliament as well for approval. So the sequencing here, I think that you'll see, is that by October or November, hopefully we will have the basis of an agreement. But the detail of that agreement undoubtedly will take a number of years, in my view, to negotiate, and will certainly require the full transition period for that to be concluded.
Is there confusion here between the two sides, in the sense that the European Union, the European Commission in particular, view this as a process, and maybe the British regard it as a period of negotiation, two different things and not divided by semantics?
Well, no, I mean, I think both negotiating teams understand that this is incredibly complicated. I think when a lot of people in Britain, and I've lived in Britain for nearly 4 years of my life, a lot of my family are English. So, I'm somebody, I think, who has a pretty good appreciation of the British political mindset. I think when a lot of British people voted to leave the European Union, they saw it as something that was much more straightforward than it subsequently has proven to be. I don't believe they voted to break this link with a customs union or a single market that has allowed for free trade across Europe. I think they were voting to leave the political institutions of the European Union that they felt was undermining British sovereignty. I believe they were voting to get control of their borders back, for example. So we do have this real difficulty now, I think, which is really dividing opinion in the United Kingdom, as they realise that actually leaving the European Union is very complicated and potentially very expensive for the British economy.